My parents ignored me for 22 years. Then Grandpa passed away and left me $2.7 million. When I walked into court, Mom rolled her eyes until the judge said, "Wait, you're the ADA." You know that feeling when your entire life, every betrayal, every deep-seated injustice, suddenly collides with an almost poetic, brutal twist of fate? Well, let me tell you, that morning, walking into court, it felt like the universe was finally serving me a long-overdue plate of pure, unadulterated comeuppance. And guess who was on the menu? The Boston County Courthouse sparkled that morning, looking all polished and serious in the sun. I pushed through those heavy oak doors, and my heels clicked like a countdown on the marble floor. Every step was measured, controlled, but inside? Oh, there was a hurricane brewing. That familiar scent of lemon polish and old paper filled my lungs. I'd walked these halls hundreds of times, but never like this. Never as the defendant. I saw them immediately, my parents. The word felt foreign, like a label without any real substance. Linda, in her perfectly tailored Chanel suit, with her freshly colored honey blonde hair, the same shade she'd had since I was a baby she abandoned, had her perfectly manicured hand resting on her attorney's sleeve. She leaned in, whispering something that made them both smirk, and the diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light, sending little rainbows dancing across the wall. Mark, he just stood slightly apart, checking his watch. His athlete's physique had softened over the years, but he still carried himself with that old confidence, like life was just a game he was always going to win. They didn't even notice me at first. It gave me a second to steel myself, to remember exactly why I was there. Then, Linda's voice cut through the murmur, a stage whisper that was clearly meant for me. "Look who finally showed up. Our abandoned daughter graces us with her presence." The irony of her words stung, a fresh wound doused in salt. I just smoothed my simple black suit, walked past them without a word, and took my seat at the defendant's table. The whispers kept going behind me, but I just focused on arranging my notes, on breathing. Suddenly, the bailiff's voice cut through the room. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Robert Reynolds swept in, his robe flowing behind him, and took his seat. His eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on me. He paused. "Assistant District Attorney Carter," he said, surprise clear in his voice. "Unusual to see you as the defendant today." "Yes, Your Honor," I responded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Family matters bring us all to unexpected places." Behind me, I heard Linda's sharp gasp. And when I glanced back, the color had completely drained from Mark's face. They didn't know. They had absolutely no idea that their abandoned daughter had become a prosecutor, and a damn good one at that. The power imbalance they had been so sure of just evaporated beneath their feet. Their attorney, Miles Archer, was the first to recover. His expression hardened. He was reassessing me, no longer seeing an easy target, but a very worthy opponent. And suddenly, I wasn't in that courtroom anymore. I was back in Portland, Maine, in July of 1993. The air was thick with heat, sticking shirts to backs and tempers to tongues. I was just 4 months old, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the tension. My parents were arguing over the trunk of their car. "It's just for a few months, Mom," Linda promised my grandmother, Margaret, who stood holding me, bundled in her arms. "Just until we get established. You know how hard it is, starting out." Margaret's face was tight, full of things left unsaid. From the porch swing, my grandfather Charles watched silently, his judge's eyes missing nothing. He was retired, but that authority still clung to him like his aftershave. "The baby needs stability," Margaret said, her voice low but firm. Linda just rolled her eyes, checking her lipstick in the side mirror. "She has you too. What could be more stable than a judge and his wife?" Mark slammed the trunk closed. "We've got to hit the road if we want to make it before dark." They kissed me goodbye, quick, perfunctory touches, already gone in their minds. The car pulled away without a backward glance. And I didn't know it then, but a few months would stretch into years, punctuated only by obligatory holiday appearances. What I didn't know was the feeling of Margaret's tears falling on my forehead as she watched her only daughter drive away. My grandparents, Margaret and Charles, gave me everything my parents couldn't or wouldn't. Charles taught me justice through bedtime stories about his cases, moral lessons wrapped in tales of real people making hard choices. Margaret's kitchen was where I learned about love, consistent, reliable, unconditional. They never missed a school play or an award ceremony, always sitting front and center while my parents' chairs remained empty. On the rare occasions Linda and Mark did appear, their affection felt hollow, like a performance rather than genuine connection. When I was 16, Margaret died suddenly, a stroke that took her in the night. The funeral was small, dignified, just like her. My parents arrived 40 minutes late, Linda complaining about her black dress in the church bathroom while I stood by my grandmother's casket. "I'll make you proud, Grandma," I whispered, my hand on the polished wood. Charles squeezed my shoulder, his grief as palpable as my own. In that moment, something crystallized within me, the knowledge that my real family had never been Linda and Mark. It had been right here, in the steady presence of two people who chose to love me every single day. Yet even then, some small, foolish part of me brightened when Linda hugged me after the service. Charles saw it happen, the hope flickering across my face at that rare maternal touch. "I still wish they'd stay," I admitted to him that night, ashamed of this weakness. His eyes were kind, but knowing. "Love is a choice we make every day, Joe. A choice my parents had never made. Not until money was involved." "Miss Carter," Judge Reynolds said, pulling me back to the present. "Will you be represented by counsel today?" Before I could answer, Miles Archer rose. "Your Honor, the plaintiff questions Miss Carter's competence to manage such substantial assets." Linda nodded vigorously beside him, still not fully grasping what was happening. I almost pitied her. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "I'll be represented by Evan Mitchell, and for the record, I prosecuted 3 successful fraud cases before your bench last month." The judge's subtle nod told me everything. He saw right through them. And for the first time since Charles died, I knew exactly how this was going to end. A month before, rain had pelted the windows of Charles's study, a fitting backdrop to the hollow quiet that had settled over the house since his funeral. I stood motionless before his mahogany desk, my fingers hovering above a wooden box I'd never seen before. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked, its steady rhythm the only sound besides the storm. "What were you keeping from me, Charles?" I whispered, lifting the ornately carved lid. Inside lay a series of leather-bound ledgers, each labeled with a year, spanning the past 2 decades. I recognized my grandfather's meticulous handwriting immediately, the precise script of a man who believed details mattered. Pulling out the most recent volume, I sank into Charles's leather chair, inhaling the lingering scent of his aftershave. The first entry hit me like a physical blow. January 2005. Linda called requesting additional funds for Mark's business venture. Sent $2,500 as usual, makes 264 consecutive monthly payments. My hands trembled as I reached for Charles's calculator. The math wasn't complicated, but I needed to see the number. 22 years. $2,500 every single month. The sum on the display made my stomach clench. $660,000. They took enough to buy a house? I whispered, pressing my palms against the cool surface of the desk to steady myself. I pulled out more ledgers, each containing the same pattern. Year after year of $2,500 payments, all meticulously documented in Charles's precise script. Between the pages, I found photographs. Linda on a yacht in the Mediterranean, Mark at exclusive golf courses. Images dated during weeks when Linda had claimed she was too busy to visit her ailing father. The clock struck midnight as I moved to Charles's computer. The password came to me instantly, Margaret's birthday, the one date he never forgot. Among the desktop folders, one caught my eye, Linda requests. Email after email unfolded before me, a systematic pattern of manipulation so transparent it made my teeth ache. Dad, Mark needs new equipment for tryouts. The coach says he has real potential this time. Daddy, I miss you terribly but can't afford the trip right now if you could help just this once. Between the blatant appeals were more insidious messages. Mom always said you loved Josephine more than me. I guess she was right. Mark's requests were rarer, but larger, for business ventures that produced nothing but excuses. The realization crystallized with painful clarity. They had never seen Charles as a father or grandfather. He had been nothing more than an ATM to them. I closed the emails, needing air, but instead found myself searching public records. Attorney Miles Archer's name appeared connected to multiple aggressive inheritance disputes. Linda's social media accounts, usually set to private, had recent posts visible to friends hinting at family wealth finally coming their way. A deeper search revealed Mark's gambling debts, tens of thousands owed to people who didn't send polite collection notices. County records showed something even more damning. Linda had been involved in 3 prior inheritance disputes with other relatives. The narrative they were constructing became clear. Charles had been manipulated by Josephine in his final years. I was the villain in their story, the obstacle between them and the money they believed was rightfully theirs. As dawn approached, I noticed a desk drawer I'd overlooked, marked with my name in Charles's handwriting. Inside lay a sealed envelope, the wax emblem of his judicial office still intact. My hands trembled as I broke the seal, unfolding a single page of Charles's stationery. "My dearest Josephine," it began. "If you're reading this, they've already begun their pursuit. Remember what I taught you. Justice isn't always found in courtrooms. Sometimes it's in standing firmly for truth. You have always been the best of me. They know it too, which is why they fear you. With all my love, Charles." Enclosed was a photograph I'd never seen, Charles in his robes, young and resolute, with the same determined expression I recognized from my own mirror. The tears came then, hot and cleansing, giving way to something harder, more certain. I wouldn't surrender Charles's legacy to those who had abandoned us both. Defending myself wasn't just about money, it was about honoring the man who had chosen to be my father when my own hadn't. The next morning, I met Judge Elaine Rivers at the courthouse cafe. The older woman's silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharply assessing as we spoke in hushed tones. "Charles spoke of you with such pride," Josephine, Rivers said, stirring her coffee without looking at the spoon. "He knew this day might come." "What do I do?" I asked, the first time I'd allowed myself to voice uncertainty. "Document everything. Your parents underestimate you. Use that." Rivers slid a business card across the table. "Thomas Wilson clerked for your grandfather. He'll testify to Charles's mental clarity." That evening, Linda's voice filled my answering machine, saccharine and urgent. "Josie, darling, we need your legal expertise on this little inheritance matter." I drafted my response carefully, each word a boundary. Within minutes of sending it, my office phone rang. "But we're family." "But..." Linda's voice had lost its sweetness. "Family shows up for more than money, Mother," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. An hour later, Mark's message arrived, threats thinly veiled as concern. I saved it immediately, another piece of evidence for the growing file. That night, for the first time since Charles's passing, I slept without waking. The cost had been steep, the final severing of any hope for a genuine relationship with my parents. But in its place stood something stronger. The certainty that I was my grandfather's heir in all the ways that mattered. The Boston Globe landed with a thud on my kitchen counter 2 days later. Linda's face stared up at me from page 3, her eyes brimming with perfectly timed tears. "Heartbroken Mother Fights for Justice," screamed the headline. I scanned the article, ball rising in my throat as I read her fabricated tale of devotion. Charles was like a father to me after my own past, she claimed in the interview. To see his wishes twisted by someone with such influence over him in his final days. I slammed the paper shut. The woman who visited her father 8 times in a decade was now portraying herself as a grieving daughter. The irony would be laughable if it weren't so infuriating. My phone buzzed. It was Thomas Wilson, my office colleague. "Mark Carter was here," he said without preamble. "Cornered me in the parking garage to express concerns about your stability. Wanted to know if you'd been acting erratic at work." I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose. "What did you tell him?" That his timing seemed remarkably convenient given the inheritance dispute. Thomas paused. "Joe, they're working from every angle. The Attorney General's office received anonymous calls questioning your ethics. Before I could respond, my email pinged. It was Evan Mitchell. Miles Archer has filed an emergency motion claiming Charles was incompetent when he drafted his will. The court date has been moved up by 2 weeks. They're accelerating, Evan wrote. Archer knows a rushed timeline works against thorough preparation. The walls seemed to close in around me, but instead of panic, I felt something else, a cold, clarifying anger. They think I'll buckle under pressure. They're wrong. That night, I spread documents across Charles's mahogany desk, the same desk where he wrote landmark opinions that shaped Massachusetts law. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I arranged evidence chronologically, a methodical timeline of parental absence. In one box, I found holiday cards spanning 20 years. I examined each one, noting the generic messages. Merry Christmas, kiddo. Love, Mom and Dad. No references to achievements, interests, or personal details. They never knew me well enough to include them. Another folder contained Charles's private journal entries. Linda called again about money, one read from when I was 12. Nothing about Josephine's piano recital or how she's doing in school. When I mentioned she won the regional competition, Linda changed the subject. In a dusty album, I discovered something that made my hands shake. Videos of childhood milestones. My high school graduation, college commencement, law school ceremony. In each one, 2 chairs in the front row were marked with handwritten signs, reserved for Linda and Mark Carter, empty chairs that Charles kept saving despite knowing they wouldn't come. I traced my finger over his neat handwriting. They never really knew me at all, I whispered to the empty room. The following morning found me at Mount Auburn Cemetery. The early autumn air carried a chill as I placed fresh flowers on Charles's grave, my weekly ritual, something Linda and Mark never bothered with during his life or after his death. I was arranging the stems when I heard footsteps on gravel. Looking up, I saw Linda approaching, a designer coat buttoned against the chill. Her face registered surprise, then calculation. I didn't expect to find you here, she said, glancing at her watch, as though even in death, Charles was just another appointment. I come every week, I replied, standing to face her. A groundskeeper worked in the distance. The rhythmic sound of his rake scraping leaves the only noise between us. Linda's face hardened. You turned him against us. The accusation hung in the crisp air. I took a measured breath, feeling Charles's presence beside me. He saw you clearly, I said quietly. So do I. Something in my calm tone seemed to snap her control. Her carefully crafted mask slipped. You always had it easy. His favorite. She spat the words. We struggled while you lived in that mansion, getting everything handed to you. I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, seeing the desperate, bitter woman beneath the polished exterior. I had grandparents because I had to, I said. You had a father you chose to ignore. The slap came fast, echoing between gravestones. My cheek burned, but I didn't flinch. Linda's hand hung in the air, her eyes widening as if shocked by her own action. That's the last time, I told her, my voice steady. You will never touch me again. I walked away, leaving her standing alone by the grave of the father she never bothered to know. Back home, I found 3 voicemails waiting. Judge Rivers asking to meet privately about court procedures. Evan Mitchell offering to work pro bono. Charles helped me through law school when no one else would. The office manager approving extended leave despite our heavy caseload. Each call represented someone showing up, contrasting sharply with the parents who never did. That afternoon, Thomas Wilson arrived with a thick folder. Archer has a pattern, he explained, spreading documents across my table. Questionable tactics in 3 prior inheritance cases. Always representing clients with tenuous claims to large estates. As Thomas detailed his findings, my doorbell rang. Charles's former housekeeper stood on my porch, manila envelope in hand. I was with him every day for 15 years, she said firmly. That man was sharp until the end. I've written it all down, dates, conversations, everything. Use it however you need. After she left, I added her statement to a growing pile. People were appearing from every corner of Charles's life, offering support, testimony, evidence. Each one proved what true loyalty looked like. Late that night, I discovered something hidden behind Charles's law books, a leather-bound personal journal I hadn't seen before. My hands trembled as I opened it. An entry from the week before his death caught my eye. Linda called about the will today. Not about my health, though she claimed otherwise. Asked probing questions about my estate planning. Never once asked how I was feeling. I turned to the final page, dated 3 days before he died. Appointed Josephine executor knowing she alone has the integrity to handle this. The others will come for what they think they deserve. They'll underestimate her as they always have. Tucked inside the back cover was a sealed envelope addressed to the probate judge, explaining in Charles's precise handwriting his sound mind and deliberate decisions regarding his estate. 2 days later, in the preliminary hearing on the competency challenge, I sat beside Evan as he presented this letter along with medical records and witness statements. Miles Archer's face grew increasingly tense as Judge Reynolds reviewed the evidence. The evidence suggests Justice Carter was acutely aware of his decisions and their implications, Judge Reynolds finally declared, dismissing the motion. The will stands as written pending full probate proceedings. It was a small victory, but a significant one, the first public defeat for Archer. As we exited the courtroom, I caught Linda's expression. For the first time, genuine concern replaced her confident smirk. That evening, I created a comprehensive evidence binder, dividing it by category: financial records showing patterns of exploitation, my detailed timeline of their absence from significant events, medical records confirming Charles's mental clarity, and Linda's contradictory statements highlighted in different colors. I added video testimonials from Charles's colleagues and cross-referenced Mark's gambling debts with the timing of their inheritance claim. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, revealing their true motivation. As I finished organizing, my phone rang. It was Evan, his voice urgent. "Josephine, I've found sealed court records from Linda's previous disputes. There were 2 other wills she contested, her uncle's in 1998 and her cousin's in 2007. Same pattern, same claims." I gripped the phone tighter. "She has a history of this." "Yes, and Judge Rivers just called. She's found a legal precedent that applies directly to our case, Peterson versus Thornhill, 2012. The Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that repeated inheritance challenges constitute a pattern of exploitation." I added this final piece to my binder, a quiet confidence settling over me. I looked up at Charles's photo on my desk, his eyes seeming to watch me with pride. "They won't see this coming," I whispered, my voice echoing in the quiet room. The final battle lay ahead, but for the first time since this began, I knew with certainty that I would win. A day before the courtroom confrontation, the conference room glass reflected my image as I arranged the folders in precise chronological order. Each deposition transcript represented another nail in Linda and Mark's coffin, a coffin they'd been building for 22 years without realizing it. They filed a motion to exclude, Evan announced, entering with coffee and a stack of legal briefs. His tie hung slightly loose, evidence of the all-nighter we'd pulled. "Archer's claiming our evidence is prejudicial rather than probative." I nodded, unsurprised. They would. My voice remained steady, betraying none of the fury simmering beneath. "Which judge?" "Peterson," Evan grimaced. "Not ideal." Judge Peterson's reputation for excessive caution was well known. I'd argued before him twice, won both times, but barely. "We have alternatives ready." I tapped the blue folder containing our contingency strategies. Charles had taught me to prepare for every possible judicial ruling, favorable or not. "When's the hearing?" "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Evan glanced at his watch. "That gives us 20 hours to shore up the psychological expert testimony." I turned to the window, gazing at Boston's skyline. Somewhere across town, Linda was probably selecting her outfit, rehearsing her tears. The Boston Herald lay open on the table, her tearful interviews splashed across page 3, "Mother Fights for Family Legacy." The PR consultant they'd hired had done her job well. The article painted me as calculating and cold, the ungrateful daughter who had manipulated an elderly man. For a moment, doubt flickered, not about the case, but about public perception. Did people actually believe her? This isn't about headlines, I reminded myself, echoing what Judge Rivers had told me during our late-night call yesterday. The court sees evidence, not media narratives. Rivers had been my lifeline, her wisdom steadying me when emotions threatened to overtake strategy. They want you to be reactive, she'd said. Don't give them that satisfaction. My phone buzzed, a message from Thomas Wilson, who'd been tracking down financial records. Found something. Meeting at lunch. I texted back a confirmation. The deposition schedule lay before me, a carefully orchestrated symphony. Financial analyst Jerome Bennett at 10 a.m., followed by Dr. Levinson's testimony about Charles's mental acuity. By afternoon, 3 witnesses from Linda's previous inheritance disputes would arrive, each unaware of the others until they came face to face in the waiting room. Evan shuffled papers, breaking my reverie. Your boss called. Mark stopped by the DA's office yesterday. My hand froze over the calendar. What did he want? Raises concerns about your emotional stability and potential conflict of interest. Evan's jaw tightened. Suggested you might be misusing office resources. The calculated nature of their attack revealed both intelligence and desperation. Attack my professional standing while challenging my evidence. I closed my eyes, allowing 3 seconds of pure rage before compartmentalizing it away. What did Jameson say? Told him to put any concerns in writing and submit them through proper channels. Evan smiled slightly, then mentioned he was looking forward to attending court tomorrow in support of his most promising ADA. Something warm unfurled in my chest, not triumph but recognition. This was what support looked like. Not Linda's tearful performances or Mark's false concern, but people standing beside you when attacks came. By noon, I'd corrected the technical filing errors Archer's team had identified. A simple date discrepancy, easily remedied but sufficient for delay if left unchallenged. Their strategy was becoming clear: death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each small victory would drain our resources and energy. Thomas arrived with a thick folder of bank statements. I tracked the money, he said, spreading documents across the table. Every single transfer from Charles to Linda for 22 years. But here's the interesting part. He pointed to highlighted entries. The amount spiked whenever Mark had career setbacks. The pattern emerged clearly: $5,000 withdrawals following Mark's team cuts. $10,000 after his final release from minor leagues. Each professional failure followed by larger financial demands on Charles. They were bleeding him dry, Thomas said quietly. No, I corrected, studying the pattern. They were bleeding him strategically. After Thomas left, I sat alone, the Boston afternoon sunlight slanting across the documents. For the first time, I truly understood that this fight wasn't about money. The inheritance was substantial, $2.7 million, but this case represented something far more valuable: Charles's agency, his right to determine the legacy of his life's work. My phone rang. Linda's number. I almost declined, but then answered, putting it on speaker as Evan returned. Josie, darling. Her voice dripped with practiced maternal concern. This has gotten out of hand. We can work this out as a family. The word family in her mouth sounded hollow, a convenience rather than a commitment. That's what court is for now, I replied, my voice even. You're being ridiculous. Your father and I filed false claims about Charles's mental state, hired a PR firm, approached my boss with fabricated concerns. I kept my tone clinical, as if discussing case facts rather than personal betrayal. Linda's pause spoke volumes. We can split it. 60-40, Evan raised an eyebrow at the insulting offer. I'll see you in court tomorrow, Linda. I ended the call. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Miles Archer looked immaculate but strained, his confidence visibly diminished since our first encounter. Mark sat slightly apart from Linda, their unity fracturing under pressure. Dr. Levinson took the stand first, her credentials impeccable as she detailed Charles's cognitive assessments. In your professional opinion, was Justice Carter mentally competent when he revised his will? Evan asked. Absolutely, she replied. His MMSE score was 29 out of 30, exceptional for any age. Miles Archer rose for cross-examination, his approach aggressive. And yet you never assessed him specifically for undue influence, did you? Objection, Evan called. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Archer's frustration flickered across his face. He'd expected an amateur opponent, not a coordinated legal strategy. By midday, the financial analyst had methodically outlined every payment from Charles to Linda $2,500 monthly for 22 years, totaling $660,000. The courtroom fell silent as the number appeared on screen. Linda leaned toward Archer, whispering urgently. Their planned narrative, the devoted daughter denied her birthright, was crumbling against documented exploitation. The afternoon brought 3 witnesses from Linda's past, former in-laws and distant relatives she'd challenged in previous inheritance disputes. Each testimony painted a consistent picture of systematic financial predation. Mark shifted uncomfortably during the third witness, creating distance between himself and Linda with each damning answer. And how many times did Mrs. Carter visit her uncle during his final illness? Evan asked. Once, the witness replied, the day after he revised his will. The judge's gaze sharpened, his pen pausing mid-note. No further questions, Evan said. What began as our defense had transformed into their prosecution. The final day arrived with the courtroom packed to capacity. I took the stand, hyper-aware of every eye upon me. Ms. Carter, Evan began, why are you contesting your parents' claim to your grandfather's estate? I met his gaze steadily. This case has never been about money. Methodically, I recounted a lifetime of abandonment, holidays spent waiting by windows, school events with empty chairs, birthdays marked by brief phone calls that came days late. I'd like to read from my grandfather's journal, I said, opening the leather-bound book. The 12th of October, 2018. Linda called today. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that my illness might inspire her to become a mother at last. Instead, she asked about my investment portfolio. Linda shifted uncomfortably as I continued, my voice steady. And this, I said, holding up a faded calendar, is my grandmother Margaret's tracking Linda's promised visits. Red X marks cover the pages, each representing a disappointment. 22 years of broken promises, Your Honor. When I finished, Evan rose again. Your Honor, we request permission to play a video deposition from Charles Carter, recorded 6 months before his death. Archer objected immediately, but Judge Reynolds overruled him. Charles appeared on the courtroom screens, sitting in his study. His hands may have been gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were sharp, his voice clear and deliberate. I make this recording in sound mind and body, he began, anticipating a challenge to my will. I leave my estate to my granddaughter, Josephine, not out of confusion or manipulation, but with clarity of purpose. He leaned forward slightly, those judicial eyes I knew so well looking directly into the camera. Linda, if you're watching this, know that I loved you until my last breath, but you chose absence. Josephine chose loyalty. The law recognizes both blood and choice, and so did I. Linda gasped audibly. Mark stared at his shoes. Financial records appeared next, 22 years of monthly payments highlighted in red. $660,000 total. A calendar showed Josephine's daily care for Charles, 2,500 days versus Linda's 8 visits over the same period. Finally, the clerk read Charles's letter to the court, his words filling the room. I appoint Josephine my executor, knowing she alone possesses the integrity this responsibility requires. Judge Reynolds delivered his ruling without returning to chambers. This court finds the challenge to Charles Carter's will without merit. The will is upheld in its entirety. He paused, removing his glasses. I find this lawsuit frivolous at best, predatory at worst. Attorney fees will be paid by the plaintiffs. Linda jumped to her feet. This is absurd. I'm his daughter. Order. Judge Reynolds snapped, his gavel punctuating the command. This court is adjourned. Reporters swarmed as we exited the courthouse. Linda pushed through them, reaching for my arm. Josie, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I'm your mother. I turned to face her fully, camera flashes illuminating the moment. Margaret was my mother, I said quietly. You gave birth. Linda collapsed into tears, the scene playing out before a dozen news cameras. Mark walked away without a backward glance. The power dynamic from our first courthouse encounter had inverted completely. Outside, sunlight warmed my face. I shrugged off my professional jacket, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in months. "Deep breath," Evan said, smiling beside me. "You did it. How do you want to celebrate?" I considered this as we walked down the courthouse steps. "I think I'll plant roses at their graves today." The driver opened the car door with a nod. "Where to, Assistant District Attorney Carter?" I slid into the back seat, catching a glimpse of the courthouse growing smaller in the window. "Home," I said. Finally, just home. A year later, morning light streamed through my office windows I unblocked last month after realizing I'd been working in Charles's shadows for too long. The walls breathed now, lined with law books that blended his collection with volumes I'd added. Margaret's knitting basket sat repurposed on my credenza, filled with case notes instead of yarn, but still carrying her essence. The phone rang, jolting me from contemplation. "Judge Carter." It was Angela from the foundation. Her voice brimmed with that particular warmth reserved for good news. "The scholarship committee just approved the first 5 recipients for the Carter Fund." My fingers traced Charles's gavel, polished oak now displayed prominently on my desk. "Tell me about them." "All raised by grandparents. One girl from Portland reminds me of your story. Her essay mentioned feeling more authentic with her grandmother than she ever did with her mother." Something beautiful uncurled in my chest. That's exactly what we created this for. I glanced at my calendar, no longer crammed with obligations, but filled with purpose. The inheritance that Linda and Mark had coveted now funded college educations for children whose stories mirrored my own. The robing ceremony last week still felt dreamlike. Becoming a circuit court judge in the very courthouse where my battle with Linda played out carried a symmetry even Charles couldn't have scripted. Judge Rivers placed the black robe over my shoulders in the chamber Charles once used, her hands steady on fabric that carried generations of justice. "Your grandfather stood exactly where you are," she'd whispered, "but you've already gone further than he hoped." Before leaving that day, I slipped a small photo of Margaret and Charles into the robe's inner pocket, where it rests against my heart during proceedings. The court clerk did a double take when changing the nameplate outside the chamber door. "The Honorable Josephine Carter." The echo of Charles's title now carried forward through me. The letter from Linda arrived yesterday, cream envelope, expensive stationery, her flowing script offering reconciliation, now that I've made something of myself. A year ago, it would have triggered desperate hope or burning anger. Today, I simply read it twice, considering her words with the same measured assessment I give to any case before my bench. My response was brief. "I wish you well, but our paths diverged long ago." No anger, no vindication needed, only clarity. Judge Rivers noticed the shift over coffee this morning. "Charles would be proud of your piece," she said. "The hardest judgment is knowing when to close a case for good." She's right. I'm finally free from the cycle of hoping for impossible parental love. The wound that defined me has become a scar that simply marks a boundary, visible, but no longer painful. The healing hasn't been solitary. I've started an informal mentoring program for young lawyers, especially those navigating complicated family dynamics. The roses I planted at Margaret and Charles's graves bloom now in spring and fall. My therapist, whom I no longer hesitate to mention in conversations with colleagues, helped me create new holiday traditions to replace painful memories. Last night, I wrote in my journal, "Finding family isn't about blood but about presence." Yesterday, Jennifer Davis, a young attorney with eyes that carry too much history, stopped me in the hallway. "My mother's contesting my grandmother's will," she admitted, her voice barely steady. I didn't impose my story on her, but shared Charles's wisdom. Justice begins with honoring truth. 5 years from now, standing before the mirror in the Massachusetts Supreme Court chambers at 41, I adjust my robe and catch a glimpse of my reflection. For a moment, Linda's mocking face from that first courtroom flashes in memory, but it's distant thunder, no longer a storm that threatens to drown me. The bailiff's voice echoes through the chamber. "All rise for Justice Carter." The weight of legacy rests on my shoulders with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who I am. 20 years later, Gray threads through my hair as I preside over a family case remarkably similar to my own. The young woman on the stand speaks of grandparents who raised her when parents abandoned their responsibilities. I quote Charles's letter verbatim, the words burned into my memory. Justice isn't always found in courtrooms, sometimes it's in standing firmly for truth. My closing statement resonates through the chamber. Justice is the family we choose. Presence is how we prove it. A new generation of lawyers scribbles notes, learning not just law but legacy. As the courtroom clears, my fingers touch the small photo in my robe pocket, now worn at the edges, but clear in purpose. Charles was right. Love is a choice we make every day.